order. We begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There is a correction on this. Mark Wilson was not absent.
Okay, I move we accept the corrected minutes.
I'll second it.
Those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Agenda?
Can you please speak up?
Can't hear you back there.
What?
We can't hear you.
Under new business,
Okay. State that. One change.
one change to the agenda, under new business, we'll strike the, accept the resignation of the zoning code enforcement officer.
Okay, so that's, was that change to the agenda? Those are, motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the corrected agenda. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Carried. Next item is the public meeting on the moratorium, and I'm going to go over the rules as we see it tonight. In a public hearing, and you have a copy of this was made available to you at the door. There are two objectives of a public hearing.
Vibrating on the chair.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Can't see my smiling face now. So there's two objectives of a public hearing. Definition given by New York Conference of Mayors Handbook. And one of the first is to ensure that the public body, the Village Board of Trustees charged with taking action on a particular issue, is fully aware of the public sentiment about the proposed action. And secondly, to give the public an opportunity to voice their concerns, opposition, or support for the proposed action, and to bolster the public's confidence in the public body's decision. So coming with that are some responsibilities of those speaking also from this handbook. For efficiency and to ensure all voices are heard, resident and non-resident, there's no discrimination. There is a time limit of 3 minutes per speaker to summarize your opinion. Please limit comments to the topic at hand, which is the proposed short-term rental moratorium and wording changes also proposed by the Zoning Revision Committee. All comments and opinions are to be directed to the village board and not back and forth with other presenters. There will be only one opportunity to speak, and a second person is not allowed to use the remainder of the 3 minutes allotted to the speaker. When speaking, please stand if you are able and state your name and address for the record. A public hearing does not require a stenographer, so for accuracy, please provide comments in writing also if you want to be sure that of the accuracy. Members of the board do not have to answer questions or give analysis at a public hearing, although they may do so. So when everyone has had an opportunity to speak, we'll close the public hearing and move on to our regular business agenda. Who would like to begin?
Well, I think before you open the public comment, okay, so I think You may say.
Please use the microphone.
Can't hear you.
Before you start the public hearing with the public comments, I think it's important to lay down exactly what is being discussed, right? So I think that'll help expedite the conversations and narrow the issues, okay? So, as you know, right now in front of the board is a proposed moratorium law that was introduced 2 meetings ago. That moratorium, if it were to go into law, would allow for the moratorium to be in place, and the design of that is allow the zoning committee to continue doing its due diligence and putting together what they believe to be the appropriate zoning changes that ultimately will come before this board and will be subject to multiple public meetings and public hearings before those zoning provisions, if they get enacted, and what they are, right? And that will deal with not only short-term moratorium on rentals, but everything that is being updated by the zoning committee that they've been working diligently on for over a year at this point. So I think it'd be prudent before you even go further into the dialogue, right, to try to get a handle on when you anticipate that public hearing and those committee proposals coming before the board, right? There's a good possibility that we're going through this exercise and the committee could present their changes to the zoning law, because I believe they said they were saving this for last, in 2 months, and you'll be right back at this again when you actually have the actual law in front of you. So we actually don't even know if it would, any change to the short-term rentals will last the entire 6 months, because if there's a law before that, it would supersede the moratorium, right? So doesn't it make sense at many levels to kind of get a time frame as to when that issue is going to be put front and center again? Because the way I look at it is, if the law doesn't take effect until the filing with New York State, which if you approve it now, it's probably going to be at least 3 weeks before they file it, and you get it back. And theoretically speaking, you're going to be back here 3 weeks after that and have a whole nother meeting with respect to the laws that are proposed. So again, if they say it's going to be 6 months before you get it, it's a different conversation than if they say you're going to get it in now or a month or more. Has there been any indication as to when you expect those to be coming before you guys for further review?
Please provide your name and title and credentials. I don't know who you are. Please inform us.
So I'm the attorney for the Village of Cassadaga, Joe Kellner.
Speaking to the microphone.
Thank you.
So it's up to you guys. I mean, it just makes sense to get that information, right? If you're dealing with a scenario where all of this is going to be for 6 weeks versus 6 months, it could be a different point of conversation for all the audience. So I think that's important.
It is important. Yes, I think it's important. The question, I don't know how easily that is answered, because there's been a lot of work done by the committee, and it's taken a lot of time to get to this point. I don't know if I can pin down a time frame.
That's all I'm figuring out.
Unless, does the committee want to volunteer a time frame? I would be suspicious you wouldn't want to do that.
I'll speak on behalf of the committee. Brian Bergen, co-chair of the committee. We don't have a firm time frame, unfortunately, because there are variables out there. And there's some unknowns, and depending on what type of research that we get into and how deep. So we'd hate to commit to a firm timeline. I would like to say, for our sake, late fall being able to propose something, but I could easily see this going into winter. And we had a soft timeline of the year end to have everything submitted. But that's in terms of all zoning that we've done inclusive. But once again, we don't have a firm timeline on it.
Okay.
I think it was important at least to bring it up. So the last thing you want to know is when we're all done with this, then you're going to be back here in 2 weeks.
Right. Okay. So who would like to begin? State your name, please.
Good evening. My name is Rudy Eversole. I live at 43 Putnam Road. I've lived there for nearly 50 years of my 61 years of existence. I have never, ever witnessed what I'm witnessing now by this board of elected representatives. I have a letter that I'm going to read, but I'm also going to open with, any of you watched Yellowstone? Beth, we might be the tornado, and there may be a trailer court in this room. So, with that said, dear Mayor Dorman, I'm going to be very direct with my points this evening. Prior to the July 13th trustee meeting, legal language was written and made available to the zoning committee members, the village board, with a motion was made and ratified to enact a moratorium on short-term rentals. That's the reason we're here tonight. I believe I'm correct in stating the language never was presented to village residents prior to this aggressive action. It was not publicly discussed until the 15th zoning committee meeting, when several members of the zoning committee stated they opposed the language that was of the moratorium in local law 1/2022. Trustee Flaherty, who also sits on the zoning committee, stated clearly she was unhappy with the language, yet she seconded that motion to enact it 2 nights prior. Is this how our government is being run in this village? Are we in Albany or Washington, D.C.? I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be one, but I was on that board, sitting right where you were several years ago. I can guarantee you, none of the garbage that you put out on the 15th or the 13th would have ever made it beyond that board. I have researched some very interesting information, and from my heart, I believe misjustice is happening by reading our current zoning code and discovering this article, Article 18, New York State General Municipal Law. The state conflicts of interest for municipal officials. Article 18. Is any of you board members, are any of you board members familiar with Article 18 of the Municipal Code? Shame on you. Article 18 of New York General Municipal Law, the state conflicts of interest for local municipalities. Article 18 provides regulating conflicts of interest for municipal officers and employees. It applies to all municipalities in the state except New York City. Municipality can be broadly defined, including town and county improvement districts. It can also include board and commission members.
All right, that's time.
You gonna let me finish? Please, Mayor? Please? I'm
Why
asking.
not treat everybody the same,
I
so
will.
can you summarize in the next?
I'll summarize it real quickly. At your December 9th meeting of 2020, Mr. Wilson was appointed Chairman of Buildings and Grounds. At the VDOT meeting, October 27th of 2021, Mr. Wilson requested permission to have athletes park at the ball fields to alleviate problems on Park Avenue. Resolution 152, made by A-Stride, seconded by Krupa, allowing athletes to park at the ball field. 3 ayes, 0 nays, 1 abstained. Mr. Wilson abstained, which he's supposed to do, but did he get preferential treatment because he's the zoning, or he's on the village board? Conflict of interest. Every minute of his time on the board is dedicated to Wilson Endurance Sports. That's all that is ever mentioned in the minutes.
We're way off topic.
We're moving off the topic.
I'll get back on it. Mr. Wade,
Okay, so,
I'll present you with this letter. You can have this letter as your record. Who wants to come and get it?
so also just want to make clear, because there's a couple of things. At the last meeting, this board did not vote to approve the short moratorium law. So I just want to make sure that's clear from everyone's perspective. The only thing they voted on was to introduce it. You introduce a law, and the next follow-up is for a public hearing. So this is the process being undertaken tonight. You guys are not bound to approve a law because you approved to have it be introduced, right? So you could actually have exceptions to the law, vote for it to be introduced because you want to facilitate the dialogue and hear the public's opinion. So nothing that you did at the last meeting bound you to approve the law, even if you approved the language. All you did was introduce it, which now brings it before this public hearing, and then ultimately a vote. So, going back and what I talked to the mayor about, if you want to make substantive changes to the law that was introduced, you have a right to do that. It would require a new introduction and new public hearing. If there's typographic errors or non-material or ministerial issues, then you can go forward. So, all the whole process is unplain in of itself, right? You did not commit to anything. All you did was introduce it, which the next step is to invite the public to comment, which is exactly what happened.
So I'm glad to hear you instructing and educating the board on the process of enacting or proposing a local law. From my perspective, this should have happened weeks or months ago. Mark Wilson didn't know at the last village board meeting that he'd be voting on a local law. Cindy Flaherty had said at the last meeting that there would be revisions before this public hearing, without knowing evidently that that wouldn't be possible before this hearing. She also thought earlier today it would be necessary to have a public hearing before the proposed law could even be tabled. Certainly it could be tabled, it could be removed, this public hearing could have been canceled. But our board members didn't know, and that's your responsibility to instruct them, and I think that you served our community very poorly in that regard. It's also very clear that a number of people on the zoning committee and on the village board are unhappy with the wording of this law. There's no reason why this village should be proceeding with a hearing, which is the next step, as you just said, to voting on a law, when so many people in our local government, from the committee to the board, aren't happy with this law. We shouldn't have this hearing at all. This should have been canceled completely until the proposed law was revised in consideration of the zoning committee's recommendations, our village board members' concerns and recommendations, and the concerns the entire village has brought forward to the board. We shouldn't be here. And again, I think that's partly your responsibility, and I think you failed our community in that regard as well, for not educating our board sooner on this topic, and bringing all of us here this evening, when I'm sure there's other things we'd rather be doing, not to mention the grief so many of us have experienced as a result of this proposed law. And I won't get into all of that, but many people in this room have contacted me personally regarding their grief, and my personal thanks to many people who have reached out with support for the grief that I've been experiencing. But again, we shouldn't have to go through all of this. We shouldn't be here. And if it's not clear already, I am certainly not in favor of the moratorium, certainly not as it's written, and I feel that the cart is way before the horse with this particular issue.
I'm not nearly as eloquent as Sean. And I'll show my better half to most of you. This letter is from my sister. She lives in Texas. She grew up here. Lived here all her life until she got married and moved. They say the Blue War a couple years ago, well, let's see, 5 years ago. So this is what she wanted me to say for everything. I grew up in Cassadaga, and since we moved to Texas in 1989, we have visited my mom every year. My kids are grown and live with their spouses in San Francisco and Denver. Mom died in 2016, and we decided then to visit Cassadaga as a family in 2017. I don't know if I should read it. I mean, this is more than I would have. But after a parent dies, you think of things you wish you would have asked them. I wanted to tell and show my kids fun things about growing up in Cassadaga. Swimming across the lake, which we weren't supposed to do. Walking across the lake when it was iced over, which wasn't too smart. Field boards, etc. Just this wonderful little community. It's clear that Mom wanted me to understand Cassadaga before she died. She insisted that I take a copy of the history of Cassadaga. I have a lot of good memories growing up here. There are no good hotel options close to Cassadaga, plus we wanted a homey atmosphere where we could cook and hang out. I discussed options with Kathy and she mentioned the Blue Orb. I didn't realize that Cassadaga had any rental properties, but thought it could be a fun solution. I booked the property for a week the following summer. They invited her mother-in-law and her daughter's father. It turned out to be an excellent solution. Everyone had a great time. The property had everything we needed and was a great location for what we wanted to do. I don't know if you want to know everything she did, but they just talked about all the fun stuff they did that she could show her family that we were able to do in this area. She walked down our road to show her son-in-law where we grew up. We went to the cemetery, and she mentioned she's going to be buried there, if anybody cares. It would have been difficult, nearly impossible, to have this type of experience from a hotel. We were very good tenants / citizens during our stay. I understand that Cassadaga is currently making decisions about how B&Bs fit into the village and wanted to share my experience with Blue Orb. I would stay there again and would highly recommend it. Sincerely, Sue Milligan, Templeton. So, obviously, you get what she's thinking, and just, I don't know how much time I have, but I'll just be brief, because I love everybody on every side. So, it's difficult, to pick sides, because you're all my friends and everything, but I have to say that I agree that there should not be a moratorium. I feel like this all should be, let the committee do their thing, and bottom line, and, figure out if this is really what we need. And then at that time, if that's what's going to happen, it's going to happen. But for now, I don't feel it should go on. And I have enjoyed B&Bs throughout the country that I've gone to, that I've loved. And had they not been available, you go to Motel 6. We'll leave the light
on. I'm Steve Whitmark. I live at 39 Pettit Place. It would just seem helpful if somebody could describe or define what the moratorium is. I think there's some misunderstanding. People think that what's being proposed is a ban on short-term rentals. I don't believe that's what the case is. I don't think people really understand what the proposal is, and if somebody could explain it here, maybe shorten up some of the discussion.
So the New York State allows for certain municipalities to enact certain laws and moratoriums. What they're essentially saying is, hey, we don't have this figured out yet. We're afraid that if we do not act a moratorium before we address our zoning law or our code to address these issues, that there could be irreparable damage. So what we would like to do is just put a hold for up to 6 months to a year to allow us to have a better control on what to do. The purpose of the moratorium really is to then have your governing body, in this case the zoning board and ultimately the town board, and propose a rule as to relates to short-term rentals. So essentially the moratorium is to put a hold or a stopgap in place while they get it. It's very popular right now in the solar industry because a lot of zoning codes don't have zoning codes for solar systems and solar fields. So they're adopting moratoriums so then they can go back and address how they want to address that in their zoning code. That's what's being applied here. There are a number of municipalities that have short-term moratoriums on short-term rentals right now because of the impacts on the communities, and that was what was proposed by the committee, was to do a 6-month moratorium to allow them time to address how they want to propose zoning changes to address short-term rentals, and then that would come before the vote. So if it went into law, it would be essentially a 6-month pause on no new moratoriums. Those who were here last month, the current version as drafted, there is a grandfathering provision that would allow current short-term rentals to continue during that 6 months, but no new short-term rentals would be allowed for the 6 months until they come up with a new law.
6 months to a year and a half.
Yeah.
540 days.
540 days.
I'm pretty sure the one we wrote was only 6 months.
No, it says 540 days.
You wrote it, you don't know it?
I don't know.
All right, I'll go.
Stand up.
Okay. Can I go? Shh. Okay. I'm Kim Collins. I'm a vacation property owner from the Blue Oar, and I'm also a part-time resident in Cassadaga. As my neighbors and friends can attest, I am in Cassadaga all the time. I spend most of the late fall, winter, and early spring living in Blue Oar. So, and I love Cassadaga. But I am actually going to use my 3 minutes to read a letter from a woman who could not be here today. Multi-generational family, the Watermans. Many of you probably know who they are. So this is Tricia Waterman Verhoost. She wrote, Mayor Dorman and village trustees, this is Tricia, Waterman Verhoost. I would like to state that my father and my relatives have been rooted in the Cassadaga area for generations. My great aunt purchased the land and built her home here. When she passed away, my father purchased her home. It has been in our family ever since. At the time that my parents took ownership, I was about 11 years old. This became our summer home where my parents, my brother, and I spent many wonderful times together. My aunts and uncles and cousins lived in Cassadaga year-round, so during the summer months, we had plenty of family around. My cousins, my brother, and I all learned how to water ski on Cassadaga Lake. I had my first serious crush in Cassadaga. We have so many treasured memories from our time spent in Cassadaga. During the school season, my parents rented the property out to a school teacher, which worked out perfectly. It allowed my parents the needed income to keep our family home and our family. Eventually, my parents moved to Cassadaga permanently. In 2015, my mother passed away. And in 2020, my father passed away at the age of 92. He loved his home on Cassadaga Lake. My brother and I have inherited the home in this beautiful town of Cassadaga. And like my parents, the income from renting it out affords us the opportunity to keep it in our family. That is so important to us because it's what my parents wanted for us too. We hope and pray that our children would be able to continue the ownership of our homestead and be able to rent it out to help offset the cost and stay in the community should we pass. On a side note, our neighbors here in Cassadaga have not ever complained about the seasonal renters that have had the opportunity to come and enjoy Cassadaga. It's a beautiful place and its beauty should be enjoyed by anyone who would be fortunate enough to come and experience it. Sincerely, Tricia Waterman. Oh, and you gotta read that one.
No, I'm not reading. I got one.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, just bring it in, Submit.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Edison. That is an own dojo.
If they come in by mail, probably.
Let's make sure, yeah. This whole moratorium issue began with the Continental Division.
Please state who you are. So I can-
Nobody,
I'm sorry, we just state your name. So I
oh,
can-
Anita Gian, I live on Middle Lake. Nobody who was a short-term rental owner recused themselves. When I first learned of the date of the commencement of this moratorium, I felt that it was personal on the part of some of the village board, that they wanted to eliminate competition. That was my impression, and I thought it was vindictive. Why the midsummer date of August 10th? Why not January 1st, 2023? Why the big hurry when there have been no complaints? After thinking about a new law with penalties such as fines and jail time, it appears to be fascist and misogynistic. It is further eroding our rights in this country. Why do we need an oppressive law when the guidelines are fine? Let the citizens and the business benefit from the short-term rentals. That's it.
Yeah.
I have a question. My name is Rob Liederman. I'm on 36 North Main Street. I don't understand kind of all about politics is money. So I'm on Main Street. There are homes on Main Street that look just awful, that nobody is going to go and spend any money on to increase the value so that you can get more money on your taxes. The people that are going to do that is somebody that wants to get that property to be able to get $800 a week, as opposed to somebody that can just afford a home for $40,000 and still let it look like garbage. I don't understand the short-sightedness of not being able to see that your tax base will go up. A house that's $40,000, if I bought that and turned that into something that's going to draw somebody that's going to spend $3,000 a month, I don't understand the thought behind it because it's all about money. You're screwing yourselves. I don't get it. So if you can explain why you would want to do that, to have houses on Main Street look like garbage when somebody could buy them and put money into it and increase your property value.
Outside interest.
I don't know the politics of Cassadaga, so I don't understand it. I'm looking at it strictly as no politics. I don't know any of you other than,
Let's get the property value up, Rob.
Excuse me.
So,
Is your opinion for or against the
I'm against,
moratorium?
I'm against it. I don't understand why you want to do it.
Yes.
Can I add on to what Rob has said? My name is Donna House. I live at 40 North Main Street, and my husband has lived in our home for 50 years. I've been there for 38. We are homeowners. I don't own a short-term rental now, nor do I intend to in the near future, but if I ever decide to, this should be my right to do this when I want to do it.
Right on.
A moratorium would stop that. It should be decided by me, not the village board. I do not feel a moratorium is necessary or warranted. My husband and I take great care and great pride in our house. There are so many houses and yards in the village that are in varying states of disrepair and neglect, especially on Main Street. To my knowledge, most of these are homeowner occupied. A home near us needs a lot of work and will be coming up for sale very soon. My husband and I would much rather see this house purchased by someone who will fix it up and rent it rather than another owner who does not take care of their property. And if this moratorium goes into effect, who's going to take care of my neighbor's yard? Because there's a pretty good chance, like Rob said, someone who's going to buy a low-income house, as we see on Main Street all the time, chances are it is not going to be taken care of. And we've seen it in the 38 years I've lived there. I've seen that house just go downhill further and further. So we would much rather take our chances with a short-term rental than an owner that does not take care of their property.
My name is Tom Bickner. I live at 85 Maple Avenue. First, let me say that I am not opposed to all Airbnbs, although they're a business in our community, and every business in our community has zoning regulations. I'm in business, in the convenience stores, gas stations. I'm sure that if I tried to plop a gas station or a convenience store in a residential neighborhood, that wouldn't go over very well. And in terms of regulations, every business has to adhere to zoning regulations. The Airbnb business has 0 regulations. And as you can correct me if I'm wrong, this moratorium is not a proposed law at this point. It is a moratorium in order to allow our community, our village board, to put zoning regulations in place. The same as every business owner has to adhere to a regulation on their commercial business. It is a commercial business. I am not opposed to them. I think to a degree, in the right spots, in the right numbers, they're good. I would like to point a few things out. Our community, as I understand it, has now about 12 Airbnbs, which is 5 or 6 more than I realized. It's at the point where real estate values are being driven up by folks who are buying properties and their intent is to make it an Airbnb and a rental, short-term rental. First, let me say this. Young people with a family can no longer afford to buy a home in our village because the prices are being driven up so high that it's impossible for them. Look around, people. See how many young people with children currently live in our village compared to the way it was 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago. I've lived here for 40 years. We're a community. There's definitely a place for Airbnbs, but I don't want to see it unregulated and have our entire village become a village of Airbnbs. First of all, maybe it'll help the tax base. Who's going to be able to afford to live here? It's certainly not going to help families who are wanting to buy a home in a small town community like we have. So there are regulations that are necessary, not just for Airbnbs, but for every business. And that's the purpose of the zoning laws all around New York State, Cassadaga, every village. If you read the papers, how many villages and towns and cities are in the middle of lawsuits now because of Airbnb problems? Hopefully, we don't get to that point in this village. Hopefully, the moratorium makes sense because it allows time to put zoning regulations in place. It's that simple. Nobody's saying you can't have an Airbnb. They're saying you need to be regulated, like every business in the community is. You can't, I can't go next to your house and plop a car repair business and stack 50 cars outside for repair, unregulated. I don't think any of you would be happy about that, whether you own an Airbnb or not. Airbnbs need to be regulated, and the whole purpose of this moratorium is to allow people to view what regulations make sense. I want to commend our village board for taking the time to look at it and think about it. I want to commend the people on the zoning committee for their patience, and people have degraded them and said nasty things about them. It's uncalled for in this village or anywhere. So, thank you all. I am for the moratorium. On the record.
Hi, I'm Sue Asquith. I live at 186 Hill Drive. I just want to comment on Tom. I think there are current codes that are on the books. It's section 602. So it's not right to say that there aren't current codes that are regulating rental properties currently today in the village. So the zoning review committee compiled what they feel are compelling reasons to push its agenda forward. Here are the cons, which is a handout here tonight. Decrease in population. This is the only comment supported, I feel, by actual data. In 1970, there were 905 residents here. I was one of them. Today, I think that figure is in the high 500s. In 52 years, we have lost less than half the population. Short-term rentals didn't really come on the scene until 10 years ago. I fail to see the connection when there have been no efforts to attract new residents. Loss of tax revenue. We can't control sales tax revenue generated statewide. It's a moving target. The only thing we do control is our own property values and generating economic activity that benefits the overall community. Loss of community. Well, what is happening here is the definition of loss of community. Nuisances. Haven't been any reported. Check with the sheriff department. If trespassing is an issue, then people should keep their kids and grandkids in their own yards. Lack of year-round local business support. If there are 12 properties total times 2 average residents per household, that equals 24 people. Businesses aren't going under over 24 people. Raises property values. I don't think anyone can say that their financial goal is to have their largest investment remain flat or lose value. Loss of contribution of community members. I gave significant notice that I couldn't do this year's Labor Day parade and was happy to turn over my files and provide ideas. Instead, I got accused of not wanting to help my village. It had nothing to do with an SDR. Vacant property. So the argument here is that short-term rentals can be vacant at times. Are residents not supposed to leave our homes or travel for fear of harming our community? Running a business in a residential district, the comprehensive plan supported that. Development of home-based businesses. To understand the power to zone, one must understand the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is the culmination of a planning process that establishes the official land use of a community and presents goals and vision for the future that guides official decision-making. The comprehensive plan includes a thorough analysis of current data showing land development trends and issues, community resources, and public needs for transportation, recreation, and housing. Zoning is merely one method for implementing the goals of the plan. Having a comprehensive plan ensures forethought and planning precede zoning and zoning amendments. These are the strict guidelines for the New York State Division of Local Government Services, zoning, and the comprehensive plan. Based on our own SurveyMonkey results, comprehensive plan responses received were off the charts statistically. People were asked what they overwhelmingly supported in terms of housing, business, tourism, recreation, image, and identity. There's not one mention of short-term rental as a weakness in the SWOT analysis. And short-term rentals were only mentioned in terms of using VRBO and Airbnb to market these properties. This issue should be moved back to the comprehensive plan. We are here tonight to address a lack of awareness that is breaking the small-town character residents are desperate to preserve. I'm hoping you're all listening.
Sue, did you want to submit that letter? Sue,
What's that?
you want to present that letter?
Oh, I will at the end.
Yeah, no, real quick, anyone who has written documentation, make sure it gets up here because then it goes into an official record and earmarked by the village, so if anyone ever requested it. So if you want that written letter, whatever it is, or other people's submissions, make sure you put them in so they're part of the village record.
Yeah, I'm brand new, I can't keep up, so I'm trying.
And then also, section 602 applies to boarding houses and bed and breakfast, so it wouldn't be applicable here, but there is a provision.
And it
for
says in
rentals.
similar terms.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be here.
Why not?
Why not?
So a short-term rental is actually defined by New York State Court as something less than 30 days, but which may make sense. However, the boarding house and bed and breakfast, one, you're licensed, and two, the owner is still in the occupancy, right? If you're running a bed and breakfast, there's a manager, a proprietor that's on site, same with a boarding house.
So if you rent out your room, if you're renting out beds in your house and you are bed and breakfast.
What's that?
So if you're doing an Airbnb, but it's just a room inside your house, like I think there was a lady named Pamela who mentioned this about wanting to be able to rent out a room inside of her house, then that is
I don't think there's a clear-cut answer on that, to be candid with you. I don't know if it's applicable or not. Well, I know.
You just said it was.
The boarding.
On that particular issue, I don't know.
But that is the issue though, right? That's part of the issue.
All I'm saying is that that particular issue, along with the definition of short-term rentals, the legality of it, isn't throughout New York State being litigated right now. Those definitions, those terms, everything's being litigated because it's the first time that's ever become an issue, and it's not unique to Cassadaga, unique to Chautauqua County.
I'm Genevieve Monticelli, and for transparency purposes, this is my dad, Tom Beekner. I have a lot of friends in this room on both sides, and so this makes me very nervous. Like Mrs. Thorpe, I feel you, because you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want this to be an issue I do this is me and my mom. We get emotional when we feel something, so I'm sorry. But I have children here, and so I have good friends who own Airbnbs. I have a big stake in this community. I grew up here, I was born here. And I just hate to see the community torn apart like this. I want to commend both committees and the board, because I know that this is tearing you apart personally too. I'm sorry. The purpose is to protect everybody in the community, not to have your personal interest at heart. And in my opinion, if the moratorium is for making sure that there are rules in place that protect us as homeowners and people who currently live in the village, then it's a good thing with a time limit to give us the rules and regulations that will protect us, protect the people who are here to visit us, and make sure that everything is being done in the correct way. And if I'm correct, again, I don't know if I am, I think, Kim, that your Airbnb is being used as a top-notch example of how an Airbnb should be run. The guidelines are going to be based around how you run your business, and that's amazing. Like, kudos to you for being so, transparent with your neighbors, friendly, making sure that if there are any concerns, you take care of it. And I think that's why there haven't been complaints, because it's you are there. And now I can't speak to any other short-term rentals because I don't really know you, but I know how dedicated you are to that. I also just don't want to see investors coming into our very, as one of my friends says, hallmark village, and buying up properties just to rent them and not care about the community we're in. Making sure that you're not paying double the value of a home so that your neighbor's property goes so high that they can't pay their taxes anymore. That's going to increase property values. And that's for me too. Like, I live in the village. That's scary for me. I have a very young family, and to say we are financially stable is not exactly true. Like, we have to make sure that we're going to make ends meet at the end of every month. So for me, I can see both sides, and I just want to say that I hope that everyone has the best intentions and that we can stop making this political and
this side against that side, and he said, she said, because I hear all of these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not what it should be about. It should be about protecting all of us, whether you're a short-term rental owner or you are a village resident. Thank you.
Can I speak? I'm new to Cassadaga. Yay! I bought a house from Ray Haynes. Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah Metzger, 134 Maple Avenue. Speaking to this gentleman that just spoke recently, I forget your name?
Tom Beekner.
Tom
Beekner.
Beekner?
Yes.
Hi, Tom. There was a statement made that people can't afford to live in Cassadaga. I bought a house for $86,000. There are affordable houses in Cassadaga. And it was just last year. It's not even been a year yet. So there are affordable houses. I ran an Airbnb in Silver Creek. I lived there for 31 years, and I saw that beautiful little village of Silver Creek go downhill more and more and more. And I saw it happen, and as I started observing it, I realized it started happening because of all the long-term rentals. Nobody even addresses that here. Long-term rentals can be an absolute nightmare. My sister had to sell a long-term rental last year because the government said that people didn't have to pay their rent. And she couldn't pay her bills. She called the village. They said, you have to pay your taxes, you have to pay your water bill. She said, they won't pay the rent, and I can't do anything about it. So I think we need to just take a pause back. Everybody is coming for, I've talked to neighbors who are very much against it. I love my neighbors. I want everybody to be heard, and I think there's a place if it's done right, and it isn't just even Kim, although Kim gets a lot of credit. Airbnb is very strict. I had a very large man who apparently I didn't wait on hand and foot and didn't give me a good recommendation because of it. There are people out there. We are under Airbnb. If you want to run a viable business, you better be top-notch, regardless of the village law. They're very strict. And people pay attention to that. If you have less than 5 stars, they don't want to go to your facility. You have to keep your place updated. You have to keep it improved. You have to keep the yard clean. When I was in, like I said, I've been in Silver Creek for so long, I see moms and pops get older, the spouse passes, one of them can't afford the property anymore, it gets run down, it goes for back taxes, or it gets sold cheap. Somebody comes in there for long-term rentals, rents it out. I mean, we have people on crack and dope and all kinds of stuff around there. It's terrible. Okay. And then they run down, and that's the problem. The village of Silver Creek lost so many mom and pop businesses, it's the saddest thing. And it used to be a beautiful little hallmark community. So I think we have a big problem that we don't want to have happen here. If you restrict short-term rentals, if people can't afford their property and have to rent it out long-term, you really stand a risk, and I don't think you realize that.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name's Adam Dye. I own a business in Cassadaga right now, and soon opening up a business at Four Corners. On this particular issue, I think for myself and my businesses that I own, that short-term rentals bring a great revenue. I do think there should be rules and regulations. I don't feel as though it's fair to cut everybody off to people who are, we got a year and a half and you guys can't, do this because you're going to hurt construction, you're going to hurt us as a business, JoJo's, Quick Bill, you name it. Also, I'd like to speak really quickly on behalf of some of the board members that I've ran into issues and have a problem with their character, I guess. You were in my business without my permission, giving my inspector a hard time.
You need to stick to the.
This is exactly about the topic, it adjusts his character. You, on the other hand, I called you twice in regards to an issue I had in no phone call, and the third time I had to call you to get an addressed issue. My point is I don't know why he is in my building. He has nothing to do with the inspector. He has nothing to do with anything, and you definitely don't have the right to come in my business and give my electrician and his inspector a hard time when he has more certifications than you do and knows more than you do as far as code and all this other stuff. That being said, on the record, I'm telling you right now, you are not to be in my business at all for any reason.
What's your opinion on the consortium?
What is my opinion? I think it's a great thing for the community. It brings in revenue for small businesses, and I think there needs to be regulations on it. And I'm fine with it.
Opinion on the moratorium?
I'm against the moratorium.
Okay, thank you.
Jeannie McCrowd, 272 Dale Drive. Unfortunately, my husband couldn't be here this evening, but we wrote a letter. I believe we emailed it to everybody on the board, but I will submit a hard copy at the end. I will just summarize it instead of reading it. We're totally against the moratorium. This village needs people to come here. I sat and listened to a meeting the other night of a couple that moved here because they stayed in an Airbnb. I thought that was amazing. You take that away from people, who's going to want to come here? My children don't want to come here because there is nothing to do. There is not a business. And it's just, there's nothing for them. If we die, they get our house. We have put so much money, so much effort into that property to make it beautiful for this village. They won't be able to afford it because we put more money than we possibly could get back in return. You are taking people's property rights away from them. Let them do as they see fit. There has not been any troubles, no police reports. Everybody that I've met through Airbnbs, like I've met people who stayed at Rodney's house, at Kim's house, they have been super pleasant people. I would love to see them long-term say, oh my God, this would be a great place to come and retire and live. But if you're excluding that out, who's going to find this great village? We lucked into it 20 years ago because my mother-in-law was selling her property. That's the only reason we moved here. And at first I regretted it. I have come to love it. And we spend a majority of our time here. So even I don't have any, right now, thinking of having an Airbnb, but maybe when I'm older and we want to travel and we're gone certain parts of the year, I don't want my property to fall in disarray like some of these properties do. You're also being very short-sighted that other towns have pending litigation on this. And what's going to happen is this is probably going to go to pending litigation. How much of our tax dollars are going to have to go to that? How much are they going to be raised by to support something that it seems a lot of this village is not in favor of? So I just think that you really need to look closely at that because I honestly think you're not getting very sound legal advice. And this is also coming from my husband, who is an attorney, so I don't want to hear, I don't know what I'm talking about, or we don't know what we're talking about. He does, and he has told me about it. I'm an intelligent person, I can listen to what he has to say, but I feel like, as Sean said, legal advice has not been the greatest if you're proposing a moratorium with not clear language for the village. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
You want to include that paper?
Do you want it right now? Or should I give it at the end of the meeting?
Just so we get it.
Yeah, I'll give it at the end of the meeting.
Hi. I'm Judy Gardensarak, 182 Dale Drive, new resident. Was able to afford a house. Yay! Sorry I didn't bring children, but I'm trying to recruit my son to move here with us. I'm here tonight along with, I think, probably all of us doing our civic duty, right? This is how you have good government. You do your civic duty. You show up when you have better things to do. So I commend us all for being here, the board for being here. This is what civic duty is. In no way should my comments be interpreted as a lack of appreciation for others' times or efforts on behalf of the village. I'm saying this because I've heard a lot about, but they do so much, they do so much. I don't think anybody's criticism or opinions or about someone not doing enough or not caring enough. My statements are based on my observations and my research and the documents of the village that guided me in the state of New York. And I've attached them in the links inside my written emails, and I'll leave my paper. Just so everyone knows, there's a beautiful document from the Comptroller of New York State on the ethics of local governments, a model code for the ethics of local government. Great read. Has question and answers, and there's some that are very pertinent. I also read the organizational meeting minutes from December 4th, 2019, when the mayor took his oath of office, and his comments that day that he chose to make were specifically about the ethics, the village ethics, and having the trustees sign that, and also about having a board appointed, an ethics board. I'm not sure if that was ever done or not, and if not, why. Did it serve? It was done? They meet, there is one. I didn't find anything on the village site. That might be my lack of clicking around, but I also did notice that nothing has been updated to the village local law in the last 10 years. Not a darn thing in there. Some of my concerns that I've observed, and they're really ethical concerns, and I think that's why we're here about this moratorium, is because of the ethics of this group. Which means that maybe the citizens of this community don't care about the ethics or holding people accountable to the ethics, because that's why people can do it. I've observed citizens be labeled, concerned citizens labeled as a campaign of misinformation, but yet I haven't heard any misinformation. I've heard differing opinions. I don't think anybody was confused about what a moratorium means from the get-go of that meeting on July 15th. Multiple zoning members commented and agreed that the proposed language of the short-term rental moratorium was problematic and not appropriate for Cassadaga. Yet as a committee, they recommended to the village board to enact it. I find that to be poor quality work. Nothing to be revered, I guess. Members of the zoning committee meeting, the standards of the zoning committee members, they meet, pardon me?
Can you summarize? Your 3 minutes are up.
Wow, that went fast. Village employees, which everyone is, there's a lot of conflicts of interest. Mark Wilson at the meeting only mentions about his sports, his private business. That's not correct. He shouldn't be talking during a village meeting about, somebody else can speak about an event that's coming to the community, but not Mark Wilson. No one in this board should be voting on another member of their family's pay raise if that's happened in the past. There's just a lot of things that are kind of icky to me as a newcomer to your community.
Okay, thank you.
Bob Ruther, I'm here representing my daughter Madison, who owns property at 231 Dale Drive. And I just want to make just a few brief comments. There is no law in the books concerning short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied. In fact, the definition of a boarding house from the Cassadaga zoning code is any single-family dwelling unit lived in by a family, where for compensation guest room lodging is provided, lived in by a family. The term boarding house shall include rooming house, lodging house, bed and breakfast, and any other similar terms. So there is in fact something in the code. There is nothing for non-owner occupied residences, which means you cannot have them. If you have a single-family dwelling that qualifies as a boarding house, you have the right to go in front of the ZBA and ask for a special use permit. That is how you get authorized under zoning. Owner-occupied house. My suggestion would be for the committee to define exactly what an owner-occupied house is. A month, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention also in the zoning is the Zoning Board of Appeals has absolutely no power to amend the zoning law. It must exercise great care to ensure that its rulings do not, in effect, amend the zoning law. So should a owner-occupied person come before this board and ask for a special use permit to run an Airbnb, the ZBA cannot hear that appeal. Because by doing that, it would change the language of the definition of an owner-occupied house to also include a non-owner-occupied house. And that is simply illegal. It can't be done. So to the zoning committee, there's some cleanup work you need to do. If you are an owner-occupied house and get your special use permit, you're good to go. If you are not owner-occupied house, there's nothing you can do until these laws are changed. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. You probably don't recognize me because I haven't been here off and on yet. If you don't, my name's Jeff Kozak. I'm the owner of 74 Maple, where my family is owned since 1967, and we've been members of this community, and I do think that we're members of this community for 55 years. I'm here today to express my concerns with the very divisive motion that's in front of you to enact a moratorium suspending short-term rentals with minimal input from the community. That's why you're seeing such a large crowd today. I'm concerned as a military veteran of 30 years that the Board of Trustees are considering taking away a freedom that I swore to support and defend. I'm concerned that it was only after information leaked out in June that it became a much larger issue, and the STRs have been closed-door discussed, possibly as early as November of last year on the paperwork that I've seen. I'm concerned with the recommendation for a moratorium by the Zone Planning Committee that is in direct conflict with an updated comprehensive plan approved by Chautauqua County and the Board of Trustees that sit in front of us. I'm concerned with the blatant disrespect of community members up there and in the crowd that we can't agree to disagree and have an intelligent conversation where we can be constructive. I'm concerned with the majority of the community as not being heard or being regarded. To make this point, I'd like to ask everybody in the audience that's in favor of no moratorium to stand up right now.
No more.
Thank you. I am concerned if you continue to proceed on this path, things are going to get much worse before they get better. And this community will be further divided. I have a choice to live here or not live here. We have chosen to live here. Don't make us rethink it. I respectfully ask the Board of Trustees to take the opportunity to lead this community, to work together on short-term rentals. This can easily be done by tabling this moratorium and allowing the committee to do the work that they need to do to get the provisions in place. I greatly appreciate your time and your consideration in this respect.
And if nobody on this board is going to thank that man for his service to our country, I vote right now.
Somebody else got anything to say? I was standing for a minute.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll go after you.
Ken Ulrich, I live at 9650 Last Road in Clarence Center. In full transparency, I own an Airbnb. I'm no place to have some. I just want to go on the record saying right from the beginning that I'm against the moratorium. I'm really against the moratorium from the standpoint of the process that I've observed. And some people have kind of lit on the issue of conflicts of interest, but I'm more interested in the process. And some of the stuff that I've read, it seems to be a matter of public record. Elected officials and the people that they appoint on committees are supposed to act in a fiduciary capacity in the best interest of their own constituency that they're representing. And when they do that, they can't put their own self-interest first. And I've heard a couple of what I interpret as conflicts of interest presented. I don't understand how people can be voting on an issue when they own an Airbnb themselves.
That's an inherent conflict right there. Regardless of which side you look at, it's biased from both sides. I've actually heard statements saying that I don't want another Airbnb on my street. That shouldn't even be a real consideration of somebody that's serving in a fiduciary capacity. Their interests aren't what they're concerned with. It's the interests of the people that they serve. So since the board doesn't have to answer to any specific questions, I'm just interested from the village attorney standpoint. Somebody made some comments earlier about the code of ethics. There's some inherent conflicts of interest here for people that are serving roles on both the committee and the board. So to go back to the questions earlier, what has been done about that issue? What's being done about that issue to give them counsel with regard to the correct process to be making decisions like they're making right now, which obviously have a lot of people fired up about the issues, the process, how you're going about it, the transparency of the issues. So can you speak to the code of ethics? Because I read from municipal employees or municipal board members in the state of New York. They're pretty clear. And resolution of conflicts of interest is pretty clear. You don't have to be an attorney to interpret that. So from my perspective, I wish you could speak to that issue and how it's being dealt with in terms of the process that's going on here.
Sure, I no problem. So the zoning committee, not to be confused with the zoning board of appeals. They're not elected, they're not in government, they do not want a fiduciary duty. They are a steering committee that gives recommendations to the board, who ultimately votes on the decision.
Respectfully, if I could make a comment though, the board has a responsibility for the people that are on that committee making those decisions and making recommendations to them.
They're not making decisions, right? They're making recommendations. So,
but the board is responsible for appointing that committee, so therefore they have an inherent responsibility to make sure those people serving don't have a conflict.
So I respectfully disagree. You want to hear both sides, right? So take any concept. Let's say it's what you want to do on Main Street. You want pro-business people on there. You want non-business. You don't want to put people that are all aligned in one idea so they come to the board with one uniform. You want to put a steering committee together of not all like-minded individuals. You want decisions to come from everywhere, comments to come from everywhere, all walks of life, people, low income, high income, Airbnb owners, non-Airbnb owners. Because how else are they going to come to a collective compromise to present to the village? So no, on the committee level, especially the non-ZBA, it's a steering committee giving recommendations. You welcome that level of bias and unbiased. You want that. Now, when it ultimately comes before the board for a vote, each of them does have an ethical and a fiduciary responsibility to disclose any conflicts. Then there's a process in which you weigh whether or not it's a legal conflict in which they have to abstain. Because this has not come before a vote, they have under no ethical obligation at the moment to articulate their conflict. Now, if they ultimately decide to vote on it, and if they feel they have a conflict, then obviously it needs to be disclosed. And they all go through training to the extent of it. If you're asking my opinions to the board, it's premature. I have not heard anything. I don't think any of them are Airbnb owners, and nor would I. And I anticipate if we get to a vote, eventually, one way or the other, if it was an Airbnb decision and one of them was Airbnb, that they would preclude themselves from the decision. But it's a little bit premature at this point. But the zoning committee has no standing. And for the record, just to address that comment and others, right? I do not represent the zoning committee. I do not give them advice. In fact, I've spoken to one of them today and said, or in the past, said, listen, I don't give you advice because we don't have attorney-client privilege. I have with the boards in their fiduciary capacity. I don't have with the zoning committee. They're an independent committee designed to give information to them, right? So when the board conveys information to them and says, for example, I want a short-term moratorium, I say, okay, what do we want it for? I draft the language. I then send the law to the board to discuss. The zoning committee comes, they offer their feedback based on the proposed law, and we go back to the drawing board, if that's what was called for. But I don't interact directly with them. I don't attend their meetings. I don't get asked questions from them because I am not their counsel. I'm these five.
Just to add to that, we would encourage the zoning committee to have diversity. And if we said we didn't want anybody that owned a B&B on the zoning revision committee, I think we would be missing something. We certainly want to include that part of it, because they are not the decision makers. We are. Yes.
All right, I'm Brad Blizzard, I've lived here all my life. I've grown up with a lot of you folks here, and my family here. I'm gonna stay here. I don't currently live in the village, I live in the town of Pompey. In past issues here in front of this village board, I was told my opinion means nothing because I'm in Pompey. I'm now a property owner here in the village, and my opinion means something. I am not in favor of the moratorium. It's wrong. I think you need to table the moratorium to give these people a chance to come up with the laws, the rules that you want to follow. To shut somebody down prior to even having any type of record on book of what you want done in the village is crazy. You need to give the people that have the Airbnbs and that are building them and are trying to get ready to put them on the market time to get them done. There should not be a moratorium. Table your moratorium to the first of the year. Give these people a chance. Thank you.
Yes.
I got a quick question. Why is it that we can't put this on the table and leave it until the first year when you guys come up with the rules that you're going to put forth? And let everybody get going and recover from COVID and complete their projects, so people like Toby and other people who are in business for construction and stuff, who have blocked off schedules for work and everything else, why can't we leave this open, let them do their thing, and then when you guys come up with a plan, a solid plan, a legal plan, then come up with a plan and vote on it and vote it in.
Okay, that was your second shot. We'll ignore that.
Oh, you can talk now, you wouldn't talk to me earlier, you wouldn't even call me back.
Pauline, 031 Putnam Road. I stood but my husband sat when this gentleman asked if we were against the moratorium, and I strongly am. I feel that the board is against any type of commerce in this village. This gentleman here, who I do not know, has to jump through hoops to open his business after it went through an approval by New York State and the village. But you all are breathing down his back and threatening to arrest him and put him in jail. So be as hard on the short-term rentals are you as this independent business owner.
Anyone else?
I'm Kathy Kruger. We live at 131 Leroy Place in the village, Cassadaga, and I have been at almost every meeting that has taken place on this moratorium. I just have three concerns that I would ask the village trustees and the board to consider. And many of them have come up tonight. My first concern is the state of the moratorium as it is currently written. It's my understanding that in order to make the provisions that even the committee feels need to be made, it would, as you aptly put at the beginning of this meeting, it would cause another public hearing to have to take place for that particular moratorium language. And it extends the process, this very painful process that we are all going through right now, for an undetermined amount of time. So that's one concern. Another concern that I have that I'd like you guys to consider is the exposure for the village. Somebody else mentioned that. Financially. No matter what side of this issue you're on, it is a real concern of mine that if we put a moratorium in place which will halt, even though current businesses are grandfathered, it will halt people from being able to open other Airbnbs. We keep using Airbnb, but short-term rentals. There are people that will not be happy about that. And there are people that are willing to put their money where their mouth is and challenge the village on that. And that gives the village an exposure financially that I'm not sure is worth it if we can get the rules in place and stop worrying about the moratorium. I feel like the time is better spent instead of going one version of moratorium after another, focusing on those rules and regulations that we all can live by and just move ahead that way. So I said I had three concerns, and now I'm standing here and trying to remember what my third concern is. What? Just speak into our relationship. Well, the other, I'm not sure that wasn't. village, oh Lord have mercy. Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry. Anyway, I do think that there's there's some real questions about how we want to proceed. I hear everybody's concerns, and I think that if we take a breath and we consider this logically, then it might look a whole lot better to just say, let's put a pin in the moratorium, let's really focus our energies on making sure that we protect the village, and everybody here, I think you said that very eloquently, thank you. And make sure everybody can get out of this what they need to get out of it. So I'll leave it at that, and when I think of it, I'll make them stand up and say,
at 33 Pettit Place. I don't know if everybody here understands that the zoning committee, the revision committee, has been working on the zoning for almost a year, if not more. They meet 2 times a month. They have homework to do. I'm not on that committee. I just know that that's what happens because I've done that in another community. These people are volunteers. They stepped up and said, okay, this needs to be done. I will give my time, my energy to do this. This is a zoning law that affects so many things. And for everybody to think that it should be done in 2 weeks' time, or whatever you think, that is not possible. This document is vast and huge and encompasses everything that anybody in this village has something to care about. They are going to work on this document. The short-term rental came up. They went to the village board and said, there are this many short-term rentals in our community. There are more being added. We don't have any language whatsoever in our zoning for something like this. We need to stop the ones that are coming so that we can figure this out, that nobody has said that they're going to close the ones that are existing. There's verbiage that says everything that's open is grandfathered in and nothing is going to change for that. That's what they're trying to do, is to get the regulations in place so that they can come to the village board and say, this is what we want, this is what we recommend. And then it's up to them to vote and say yes or no, we need to go back to the drawing board. I know that not one person on this board owns a short-term rental. So all this talk about ethics and everything else, that's not the case. That's all I have to say.
My name's Jen Ball, and I don't live in the village, but I have family members that do. And I think in some of the documents that were said before, you as the lawyer said that there should not be any Airbnbs grandfathered into the moratorium. So in early days, you said that. So any Airbnb, okay, it's on record that you said it. Yeah. But anyway, so we have Airbnbs that are grandfathered in. Why not cut them out? Why not pause it? Why not have them, why have them? I mean, I know you want to make money at $478 a night, but if no one else can do it, why do they get to do it? Why are they grandfathered in?
I could respond to that.
Well, I'm not done yet, so hang on. So I'm on the board for the citizens of a better Cassadaga, and I'm going to tell you, I'm 51 years old, and I'm so disappointed in this village. It makes me sick. I will not have my daughter here. I regret going to the beach. The citizens of a better Cassadaga, I'm trying to represent them. The Hallmark, I want the Hallmark. I am the Hallmark. I am the Hallmark whore. You all know it. I'm the one that decorates Cassadaga. We do this. We raise money. And this is a bunch of crap. Seriously. For the moratorium, not for the moratorium. Do you know how many, look around, your neighbors, your friends. Wait, he was my lifeguard when I was like 5. Okay, maybe 10. But anyway, I'm just saying. I don't know where the word moratorium came from, if it came from the city of Dunkirk or what happened. But this is the village of Cassadaga, and this is total crap. Like, I don't know. Pam Ulrich, I mean, look around you guys. We're neighbors. Here we have a bunch of older people in town, and they're here because their family's on one committee. I'm here because my family's on another committee. we're divided. It's absolutely ridiculous. Bill Astride is like my third father, for God's sakes. I mean, this is ridiculous. Pause this goddamn moratorium.
So I will respond, just because I think it brings up a great point. So the communication I believe you're referring to, it was an email I sent that I had concerns about the moratorium was the enforceability, and that's not something that's been raised. It's something I raised at the last meeting. I don't know how you enforce it. I think the grandfathering provision makes it very difficult to enforce because I don't know who you're going to have go out and check. How do we know we didn't rent that house 3 years ago, 4 years ago? So in my opinion is you either don't do it because of the enforceability, or you have to be much more aggressive with it. I don't weigh in on substantive decisions when it comes to village. I'm not a village resident. I look at legality, right? You're looking at enforceability. What's the point of having a law if it's not going to be enforced? So the law with the grandfathering provision, in my opinion, and I shared that to the board last meeting, was the enforceability of it is very weak.
I don't understand how the fire department can rewrite laws from 2002 and get them done with all the firemen, and you know the Cassadaga firemen, they don't agree on anything, but they happen to break down each law individually and take it step by step. Whereas here, we're a cluster. It is a mess. And me, as a banker, and trying to, I mean, this is ridiculous, and you could talk about the prices of houses in Cassadaga, I get it, but it's the prices all across the country right now. Rates are out of this world, so it's not, I can't afford a house in Cassadaga, it's you can't afford a house, period. So I'm not for the moratorium, and I'm totally pissed off at Cassadaga.
And there is no way, like I own the Blue Art, there is no way I'm calling 30 people and canceling next year's reservations for their vacations in Cassadaga. Like that's not gonna happen. So you're gonna have to table this moratorium because it just absolutely, it doesn't make any sense.
Better look out, don't threaten you with jail too.
Oh, I know.
Yes, I would like to say I have friends here that have Airbnbs. I play pickleball with Jeff. I'm friends with Kathy. I understand where they're coming from. What I do strongly object to.
Who are you?
Dennis Collins, 55 Lakeview Avenue, resident of Cassadaga, sir. What I really strongly object to is people questioning the integrity, the hard work, the perseverance of people on the board and also people that volunteer. I suggest that those people who do that volunteer themselves. Some of you may be, but this village needs volunteers. They need to step up and do what these committees are doing. And I object to any aspersions that question the integrity of this board. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Terry Siebert, 180 Dale Drive, also 239 Dale Drive. I have a question. So in the proposed law that we were given initially, it says in here, the prohibition referred to here and above shall not apply to short-term rental occupancy uses that were lawfully established prior to the effective date of this local law. What is the date that you're giving people?
So the date of the local law, if you look under the effective date, is the day it's filing with New York State. So that's what you, because there's no way like to know when that'll happen. So you're looking at provision number, section 11, sorry. And that's pretty much all laws, because once this board approves it, it goes to New York State.
Right.
So that's when the effectiveness is.
So what is lawfully, it states in here that lawfully established. What does that specifically mean?
So the way I would interpret lawfully established is something that is in fact established, something that's paying Fed tax, something that is actually in existence now under the law, which is really the only requirement now is if you have Airbnb is you're supposed to pay Fed tax. And that's really the only requirement.
Certificate.
Does it mean register to pay that tax or having already paid it that tax?
Well, that's why I said the enforceability of it is a question. And I've expressed those concerns, because how do we know? How do we know if someone had an Airbnb 4 years ago, paid a bad tax, had a register, has operated as Airbnb, and now wants to be grandfathered in this provision, as opposed to a couple people that have their Airbnbs right now active, and clearly those are active lawfully, they're paying best have to register, right? I mean, again, I've expressed my concerns about enforceability.
Why are you
And if I-
pass the law if there's no enforceability?
So I do not, so you're asking the wrong question. The question is, have they passed a law? And they have not. All they did was make a motion to introduce it, in which all these issues, among other issues, would be brought to the forefront for this board to consider.
Okay, anyone else? No one else wants to speak? No one? Go on.
Public hearing?
Second. Motion and a second to close the public hearing. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Carried.
Right, you know?
Okay, next on the agenda is Attorney Joseph Calamari's report.
Yeah, the only thing is, there was the conversation about the law with respect to the residency requirement for the constable position. And I spoke to Rox, and I think I spoke to Rox and told her to convey that I was going to present that for the next meeting, since there was no urgency in time, somebody was focused on this.
Right. Right.
So with that,
Okay. Mayor Dorman's report, no report tonight, just this meeting. Clerk Astroy, she is on vacation. Deputy Clerk McChesney's report.
I think it's just financial statements, so, July 31st, general fund balance is $385,510.04. Deposits, am I doing it wrong?
Is this the financial statement?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's wait to get to that.
Okay, well then I guess I have no report other than that. There wasn't anything in the folder, so I apologize. Yeah, sorry.
It's fine.
Okay. Subject of short-term rental moratorium. What's the? Well, table.
I move to table it till the next meeting. I second. So let's have some conversation about that, right? So maybe you have the option of doing three things.
Okay.
Putting the law, tabling it, or, withdrawing the introduction, okay? So I think the question ultimately comes, what is the goal of the board? If the goal of the board is to reconvene, to take into consideration the comments of the zoning committee, take into comments of the public, your own self-reflection, then quite candidly, you're better off just withdrawing the motion, because you're going to have a whole new document in which you're going to have to introduce that is going to have new substantive provisions.
In my opinion on that is if we keep pushing it back, you could have already addressed the short-term rental issue. So like if we make a motion to redo the language, have another meeting on it, that's what, another month or so?
My concern is if there is no moratorium, that the zoning committee is going to feel compelled to rush through it. That's my concern.
So then I think the question to me is, if you're prepared to do it tonight, is talk about the substantive issues in the actual law that you want that was proposed and introduced. It could be, hey, I'm happy with the way it was written, I want to approve it. No, I want to change X, Y, and Z. Have that conversation now, so you have a better understanding, or maybe you're not in the position to do it now, then you would table that next conversation. But either way, if there's substantive changes, and we believe there's going to be, whether it be the time frame, whether it be the grandfathering aspect, whether it be the enforceability aspect, a number of concerns are raised both internally, externally, then you're better off just going, in many ways, to start from scratch, because you can only introduce a law that you're prepared to vote on from a substantive standpoint.
I think it should be tabled. That is my opinion.
My only concern is, and I've been concerned that we don't get to hear both sides of the story. We've seen an organized, definitely against moratorium, but we've also gotten inputs verbally, by phone, and by letter on the side that says maybe that's not a bad idea. So my preference, but that's up to the board, my preference would be to table it until meeting and look at the different stuff that we got tonight, look at all of the documentation that we've seen, including phone calls, and I've made notes on phone calls that I had. But again, that's up to the board. That's just my input.
And then you want to make sure Rox disseminates all that to the board as well, right? That's what you're
Right.
going to base your opinions on.
We've been capturing every email,
Yep.
turning it out, we have hard copies of everything.
Yeah, you just got to make sure that gets to all the trustees.
Yep.
Just as I mean, there's a lot of information that we haven't seen yet.
Sure.
What was your motion?
I would like a motion to table the moratorium. I understand that we need language, we really do need regulations, we don't want people popping up tents and yards, Airbnb, I completely understand that. I liked Deanna's with the fire department, how they went section to section. If we've been working on this since November, we could have just addressed the short-term section and it could have already been done. And now we're just putting all this energy into the moratorium, and then we're gonna put even more into it by fixing the language of it. I don't think that there should be several terms. On the original one, it was 120 days, and then possibly 2 more terms of 120 days. Yeah, you do not need that much time, I think. That is a lot of time. I liked the survey option, everybody's opinions, and how we can all just come together collectively to what's better for the community. But not necessarily put huge, 6 months, like with Edison's email. If they want to find a house in the community, if they find a house, what are they going to do if it's not in that time limit,
So if we table it, are you suggesting we table it for the next meeting?
Altogether.
You're talking about rescinding that motion that was made on July 13th then. Rescinding
No, there's
that.
a difference between tabling and rescinding, and that's what I was talking about, okay? So, okay, rescinding is starting from scratch as if the voting introduced did not exist. Tabling it is, you leave it open to the possibility that you may adopt this, but at least allowing the conversation. It all comes down to what your preference is. If you make any substantive changes, and I know there's been proposed substantive changes by the zoning committee as well as from the public, because I've been sent a lot of them, but I didn't make any changes, nor did I recommend them, because it's not the public, it's not the zoning committee, as I articulated before. It's up to you guys. You're the ones that need to say, no, we want this, we want that, we don't want this, we don't want that. So you have to put yourself in a position to make that decision. If you want to table this, knowing you feel comfortable that there's probably going to be some substantive changes, then you can withdraw the introduction or revoke and then start from scratch. Or you can table it, but it still leaves a possibility that you will accept the version that is submitted. And if that is a possibility, then table it. If it's not a possibility, revoke it.
The version changes.
If it's substantive changes, then revoke it. And then discuss right here, right now, because the last time there wasn't a good plan in place, how are you guys going to come to that? Is it we're going to sit down and, next meeting maybe, put on the agenda, we're going to go look through it, Maybe it's each person make their own independent thoughts and then submit it and bring it into the meeting next time. But there should be a plan in place as to how you're going to attack this. It shouldn't be, you know, let's have someone put something together, because then all you're gonna do is get here and want more time to reevaluate after stopping the meeting. I think you guys, between the information you provided, zoning committee's changes, you're in a position if you think you want substantive changes. And that's part of the process, right? Laws get introduced all the time. They get reworked, reshot, and go back to the drawing board because, let's be honest, you five are just weighing, typically in a meeting, you have 4 people. And they usually don't weigh in on these particular issues. You needed to do something like this to draw the public conversation.
Exactly.
So now you have that information. It's how you guys want to handle from here. There's probably much more.
I would certainly like the next meeting, push it off to the next meeting to contemplate.
So then table it. Consider all the information. If you make any substantive changes, you can make them on the fly, reject that one, and reintroduce the new one, or you can even push it down to another meeting to make sure you hone in on it and feel comfortable with it. Let yourself dictate the pace. But now you feel like you at least, one thing is, you know that it's at least generated enough discussion where you guys feel comfortable probably weighing in on a little bit more on the substantive issue.
Exactly. I would like to make a motion to table it till the next meeting so we can really zero in on all the information that we've gotten tonight. There's actually more options than just yes moratorium, no moratorium. There are other options out there, and I think in the next 2 weeks we can share those options and really zero in on them. But I think we need to table it till the next week.
Second.
Make a motion.
So wait a second, Rachel said she would like to rescind it, and then she was totally ignored last 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And then again, Bill said
And now
you're
again
talking
tonight.
over again.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
What in the world?
I mean, this is insane.
She's suggesting we can rescind
Silly, no one's gonna.
You had made a motion,
Well, go ahead.
you had a motion on the floor before she made a motion.
Yes,
so-
she did.
Yes, she did. She had a motion and rescinded.
I think if you look at the minutes, Bill had the first motion. Then Rachel, then.
All right, let's go back to the first motion. Table it until the next meeting. Those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
So they just ignored her again. You just ignored her again.
You made the motion.
Okay. Okay, we're through with that section. Bathhouse at the beach.
What did you just do?
What just
Where's
happened?
Bill's motion? No,
Pardon?
she was talking
We didn't
about
know
it
what happened.
before. She was talking about it before Bill.
We made a motion, when we approved the motion to table it until the next meeting to vote. And in the meantime, figure out each of us individually what we think of what we've seen tonight in accumulation of the records so far.
No, Rachel made,
There's no motion to table it for another vote, right?
Rachel made that
All you're
first.
doing is tabling it for the board to look into all the facts.
Exactly.
That decides, it could be withdrawn, it could be approved, it could be, you're not.
That's what I thought I said.
No, I mean, I just want to make it clear.
Okay.
Because you're not tabling the vote, say, hey, we're going to vote next meeting. Essentially, you're saying.
No.
it's all the
Rachel
information,
motioned
then
that
you're in a
first.
position next week.
Okay. Does everybody understand that?
No, I think there's a problem with the motion, the way you guys handle it.
Yep, that's wrong.
The
What just
way Rachel
happened?
handles it is not correct, it's not the way it's supposed to
No,
be.
Rachel motioned first.
So
and it
the lawyer should be correcting this because
What's that?
Rachel made the first motion, she should be here first. The president that's running this meeting should be the one making her motion
There was,
first.
Bill brought the first motion on the
No,
floor.
we didn't.
Bill technically made the first motion to table.
Bill
it
said
to
you
next
made the first
meeting.
motion.
Then I said I wanted to make a motion to just get rid of it altogether.
Yes.
In fact, you got that on the record.
Yeah, that's
Bill's
recorded.
motion was first on the floor. You vote on that before the next motion was raised.
Right.
So since Bill raised it first, Bill's motion gets addressed first.
Yes.
Did anyone second it?
Mark second Bill's motion.
Can you just, I think it's important also to clarify that that means that you will discuss the actual moratorium as it exists right now at the next meeting. Because what the attorney said is if you already know there's going to be changes, he was able to substitute.
You might also propose changes and might give some input to that.
Right, but then that starts a whole new process. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, truly, I'm just trying to understand the process. So, what I understand from what, sorry, I wait for Mr. Calamari, said is if you table this and then have the discussion next meeting, everybody does their homework, everybody brings their comments, right? And if that then becomes substantive changes to the moratorium as it exists, then essentially you're going to have to rescind that original moratorium and start this process again with a whole new moratorium that also leads to another public hearing. I just want to make sure that I understood that right, and I don't want you guys to be next meeting going, oh, I thought that this was.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just don't think, we've been bombarded with all this information, we can't make a decision tonight.
Absolutely.
We just can't.
Do you think next meeting is a long enough time for you to make a decision? I mean, you guys are gonna go home and be like all stressed out for like 2 weeks. So why wouldn't you like give yourself a couple months to think about it? Seriously.
Well, you know what, while all this is going on, that's why we're gonna be still working their butts off.
So be it. And so they're working on other things, not the moratorium. You know, there's lots of things to be done, but for the stress of you all and for the rest of the village, take some time, take a break.
Okay, are we clear on what we're doing?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Moving ahead, you said there's no report on backhouse. Okay, next, new business.
Hold on a minute. He made a motion, he seconded. I didn't hear a vote.
Yes, we voted.
How many ayes, how many nays, and how
One
many
nay.
nays? Thank you. We can't hear you.
I'm good. I'll wait, I walk.
Sam? What do you got?
A roadside mower 11 and a half months ago, and we received it last week. So it's been outfitted to mow roadside. That was bought by some state money that was not necessarily bought in the village. Now that's my point of this whole moratorium too, is my standpoint is superintendent, it is. My understanding is part of the money that comes from sales tax is revenue for the village. Not a single one of them person understands that, not one. You know, so this whole thing is more too than making rules against Airbnbs or short-term rentals. You know, the point of the village coming up with this is because we get X amount of dollars for property tax. You think it's 7 million, it's 131,000, you know, hearsay. Now, the rest of our money, since they started taxing internet sales, became tremendous. So if you want a beach, if you want your sidewalks plowed, if you want snowflakes, you want them lit up, all this stuff, the money has to come from somewhere. You can't take money from water and put it into streets. You know, the money has to come from somewhere. If you want this nice little Hallmark village, your property taxes are not paying it. We need residency. Residency are full-time people who live here or long-term rentals. I'm done.
Listen to anyone else's opinion.
No report.
No report. Trustee Flaherty.
Okay, beach report. Week 5, we had 461 people. Week 6, we had 305 so far. This week, we've had 146. That puts us at 3,240 people total this season so far at the beach. There's 60 58 to 68 regular attendees for swimming lessons. Of all the mirror trips tomorrow, there are 64 people going, and the buses and the reduced swim lesson tickets, I believe were all paid for with can drive and food sales that they've been doing at the beach. And there's been all positive comments about the beach and the program. I have not heard any negatives at all. And Sam, did you get that toilet fixed?
Absolutely.
Yes, awesome. Grills. Not yet. Grills, okay. Upcoming events in Cassadaga, which August, and I'll let Mark talk more about that.